Hello, and welcome back again to Maturing the Bride. We are in Book 3, which is officially titled What the Bride Wants, but it's best known as Cat and Dog Theology. We are in chapter number 7, which is basically how to be disobedient inside the church. Now remember, what we're trying to do, if we want to be a mature bride, let me give you the big picture here. If we want to be the mature bride, we've got to learn to live like the dog and not like the cat. Cats are not mature. Dogs are. So if you want to be the mature bride, you want to build your resume, you want to rule and reign forever, you've got to learn to live like a dog and not like the cat. So here's the question. Can you still be active in the church and still be a cat? And the answer is absolutely yes. There are many people who are active in the church. They could be deacons, they could be elders, they could be working in the nursery, they could be all over the place, but they're living like a cat. We're going to learn about this from the prodigal sons. Notice the letter S on the end. It's not the prodigal son, it's the prodigal sons. There were 2 prodigal sons in the story of what we call the prodigal son. There was, of course, the younger son, but then there was the older son. Men and women, this lecture, this teaching comes from Tim Keller's book, The Prodigal God. I highly recommend it. It is excellent. It had a huge impact on my life. And it's from this book that we're getting this teaching, so I encourage you, if you want to go deeper, grab the book. But let's look at what we do call the prodigal son and look at the story. We pick it up in verse 12. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.'" This is what the younger son was asking. I want my inheritance. Now you've got to realize that the inheritance was split between the sons. The older son got 2/3. The younger son would have gotten 1/3. That's just the way it worked back in those days. It was not equal as it usually is here in the United States, at least. I don't know about what country you may be watching in. But usually in the United States we get an equal division of the inheritance. But it only happened after their father died. Very key point. It was only happening after their father died, as it happens here in the United States and hopefully in your country. After the parents die, then you get the inheritance. So in essence, men and women, what the younger son was saying to his father is, I want you dead. I want you dead. He wants his father's things, but he doesn't want the father. He wants his father's things, but not his father. So, his relationship to his father really was a means to an end. He wasn't excited about the father himself. He wasn't excited about his relationship with God. He was excited about things, not about his relationship. Now he was weary of his father's relationship, and as a result, he wanted out. He wanted to get out of that relationship, and he wanted the thing. So let's look at what was actually happening here with the younger prodigal son. Number 1, he wanted to be in control. He wanted to be in control. Number 2, he was displeased with his father. And number 3, he privately disrespects his father. He privately disrespected his father. His father should have been furious. Jesus' listeners would have expected an angry father chasing his son out of the house. But what happens? Is that what the father did? No, we all know that. So he divided his property between them. He divided it. Yeah. He gave his younger son what he wanted. He gave his son the inheritance. The father, now catch this, it's very important. The father financed the prodigal son's trip away from the father's presence. Men and women, there are times when you're going to ask God for something that's going to take you away from Him, and God the Father is going to say, okay, Here it is. Why would he do that? Why would he finance the son's trip away from his presence? Because it's a test. Do you remember? God tests us to see what's really in our hearts. And so there are times when God gives us a test and says, okay, I want to see what's in your heart. I'll give you what you want. Oh, men and women, be very careful what you ask God for in prayer. It could be the very thing that takes you away from your Father's presence. Be very careful what you ask in prayer. But anyhow, the father financed the prodigal son's trip away from the father's presence. Now, did he go to the bank and just cash in a check? No. That's not the way it worked back in those days. He had to put up a bunch of for sale signs. He had to sell some of his land to get the third of the inheritance that was needed for the younger son. And in putting up a for sale sign, all the neighbors knew it. And as the neighbors knew it, they're beginning to wonder, what's going on here? Oh my goodness, there were rumors that would have been started around. Why is he selling part of his estate, and why did the younger son leave? By doing this, he publicly humiliated his father. The younger son publicly humiliated his father by having his father put up the for sale signs and ask for his inheritance early. Let's pick back up the text. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. What's going on here? Well, we see that his heart was set on worldly things. His heart was set on worldly things. He did not want the father. He wanted the things that the world had to offer. And he rebels against his father. As well as that, he's alienated from his father. And finally, he's focused on himself. Alienated from God, focused on himself, set his heart on worldly things. This is what the younger son had done. Well, we all know how the story goes. The prodigal son repents. He comes back to the father in humility. And as we should have already been taught, and maybe you haven't been taught this, the father, who would never be seen running, runs to greet his son. He was waiting for his son to come back home. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, the father was looking for him. He's always looking for us. No matter where we are, he's always going to be looking for us. His father saw him and felt compassion and ran. He ran. Men and women, fathers in those days never ran. It was a terrible sign, but this father ran. He didn't care. He loved his son that much that he ran after his son and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Oh, it was a huge celebration, men and women. The entire village celebrated. This was the happiest day of the father's life. His son had come back. The son that he had was now back. It was a great day of celebration. So, how did the older son respond? Was he so happy that his brother was back? Was he happy that his father was happy? Or was he focused on himself? Let's see what the text has to say. Now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked him what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. He was angry? Yep. Refused to go in? Yep. His father wanted him in there. His father wanted him celebrated, but he said, "No, I'm not going to go." He was angry and refused to go in. Did he mimic any of the things that the younger son had done? Let's see. Well, yes. He wanted to be in control. and he rebelled against his father. Men and women, learn this. Older brothers can get angry with God. Older brothers can get angry with God. If things don't go our way, we can get angry with God. Why? Because we want to be in control. We're trying to tell God what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it, and by what means to do it. And we can get angry with God. His father came out and entreated him. What do we learn from that? Uh-oh, he had to leave the party. People are watching him leave. Why is he leaving the party? What's going on? What's happening here? Uh-oh, he publicly humiliates his father. He publicly humiliated his father. Older brothers can stain God's reputation. They can stain God's reputation with their hypocrisy, with their judgmentalism, with all of the things that we Christians can do. We can stain God's reputation. No matter what we're doing, we think we may be doing it to honor God, but we can stain God's reputation. Well, let's continue on with the text. But he answered his father, look. Very disrespectful. Okay, so here we have him privately disrespecting his father, doing the same thing the younger son did. He does it now privately again as the older son. Look, a very disrespectful way of addressing your father. Look, these many years I have been slaving for you. Slaving for you. Men and women, their relationship to God is made up of rules. Rules. Can't do this, gotta do this, can't do that, gotta do that, this, that, do, don't. Their relationship with God was made up of rules. It was not a sweet fellowship that God wanted for them and that He wanted with them. They thought they had to obey the rules in order to please God. It was all about keeping the rules. I have been slaving for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Never disobeyed your command? Words that would have characterized older brothers are words like self-disciplined, moral, self-righteous, duty, pride. So where does this put the older brother? In another one of the categories, same as the younger brother. Now he is alienated from his father. He's emotionally distant from his God. Men and women, what kept the older brother alienated from the father was not his sins, but his pride in his goodness. It wasn't his sins that alienated him from the father. It was the pride he had in being a good person. I'm good, therefore God's going to love me. And that in and of itself alienated him from the father. Let's keep reading the text. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. What's happening here? Older brothers are focused on themselves. It's about what I can get from God, what I want to have from God. Remember, this is cat theology. Cat theology says God is here to serve me, and that's what's happening with the older brother. Why didn't you give me all these things? What can God do for me? And on top of that, older brothers think they have rights. God, I have rights. I'm your child. I've got rights as a child. Therefore, you need to give me these things. And on top of that, older brothers question God when things don't go their way. Older brothers question God when things don't go their way. God, why are you doing it like this? This isn't right. I see it right now in my own life. I'm tempted to question God. I'm trying to build a school for a Muslim village in Kenya, and things are not going right, and I'm tempted to question God. But even in this teaching this, I'm like, no, God, you do what you want. Do what you want. I'm going to trust you through it all. So what do we have happening here? How does it parallel the younger prodigal son? He's focused on himself, and he's displeased with his father. Let's go to the final verses. But when the son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, You killed the fatted calf for him. Why was he worried about the fatted calf? Well, you need to understand that meat was a delicacy. It was rarely eaten. And you've got to keep in your mind the context. The whole village was eating. The whole village was celebrating. And so what did the older son see happening to his share of the inheritance? He originally had 2/3. That was kept intact. But now it's being cut short because of his brother. Now he has less of an inheritance because of what the father is doing for the brother. And he wants to scream, God, that's not fair. Remember, cats want life to be fair. But it wasn't fair. God does what he wants to do. He uses his wealth any way he wants to use it. Older brothers question God's wisdom. Why are you doing it this way, God? They seek to be in control by keeping the commands. And men and women, the worst part is their relationship with God is a business contract. It's a business contract. God, I'm going to do A, therefore I expect B. I'm going to do C, therefore I expect D. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to tithe. I'm going to work in the nursery. I'm going to help out with youth. Therefore I expect all these things. It's a business contract. It's not a relationship at all. It's a business contract. Don't let your relationship with God devour into something like a business contract. It's not a business contract. It's a relationship. That's what you want, and that's what he wants. You said, God, I've done all these things, therefore God owes me answered prayers, blessings on my work, the good life, and a ticket to heaven. Oh, men and women, here's how an older brother thinks. I'm going to keep the rules, get the blessings, and avoid the relationship. I'm going to avoid, because God scares me. And I know he's holy, and I know I'm not really all that holy. Therefore, I'm going to avoid him as much as I can. I'll keep the rules. I'm going to keep going to church so I can get the blessings, but I'm not really hungering for God. Oh, men and women, you can't control your life through performance. You can't control your life through performance. Don't think that by keeping the rules you're pleasing God. But older brothers feel that God's love is only received if they are performing. No. This is not what happened to the younger son. He didn't perform. He just repented. And what? God put a ring on his finger and a robe around his shoulders, which means he reinstated him into the family by doing that. He didn't take him in as a higher servant as the younger son had wanted. He brought him back into the family, which really ticked off the older brother. Why? By being reinstated to the family, the younger brother got another 1/3 of the inheritance. His 2/3 got shrunk down even more. And so he was mad. Oh, men and women, older brothers are more worried about their inheritance than their father or their brother. They're more worried about their inheritance than they are about their relationship. Christianity is about a relationship. It's not about what you get. It's about your relationship with your Father, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and his children. And so finally, he too has his heart on worldly things. Look at everything the younger brother did. The prodigal son, the older, did as well. They were both prodigal sons. And what's worse about the older brother, he wanted God's blessings more than God. He wanted God's blessings more than God. God, I'm doing all these things so that you will bless me. I want you to bless me. I'm not really worried about my relationship with you. I just want you to bless me because I want the blessings more than you, God. That's the way the older brother is thinking. And look, both of their hearts were set on worldly things. They were both alienated from the Father, and they were both focused on themselves. Men and women, there are some key things that we can learn here about the prodigal sons. Not the prodigal son, the prodigal sons. They both sought happiness in wealth and not the love of their father. Both were alienated from the love of their father. So why did Jesus talk about both sons? Why did he address both, the younger and the older, and address them both that way? Well, look at the very beginning of the parable. We find our answer. Now the tax collectors and the sinners, now let's just stop right there. Tax collectors and the sinners, they were the worst of the worst. If you've ever watched The Chosen, Matthew seeing him on there, he is the ones that the other disciples hated because he had chosen to side with Rome and not his own people. They were the vilest. They were the worst offenders. So the tax collectors and the sinners, they weren't as bad as the tax collectors. The tax collectors were worse. Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear him, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." What we learn from this opening verse is that Jesus was taking the two extremes. The vilest of all offenders, the tax collectors, and the worst of the hypocrites, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, and he started addressing them. He started addressing them. So the tax collectors and the sinners represent the prodigal son, whereas the Pharisees and the teachers represent the older brother. And so Jesus is trying to address both. This is why it's called the prodigal sons. And men and women, by doing this, Jesus redefined sin. He redefined separation from God. We can be self-centered by breaking all the rules outside the church to get things. Let me repeat that. We can be self-centered by breaking all the rules outside the church to get things. And we can be self-centered by keeping all the rules inside the church to get things. We can be inside the church and still be alienated from our Father. That's what Jesus was trying to teach us. That's what he's trying to teach us today. We can keep all the rules and still be alienated from our Father's relationship of love inside the church. Inside the church. They both sought control in different ways. Both were lost. One was lost outside of the church. One was lost inside the church. Men and women, when life doesn't go your way and you get angry and bitter with God, realize you could be an older prodigal son. You could be trying to be in control, just like the older brother, and God wants to lovingly let you know that. He wants you to break down, repent, and say, "Okay, God, I yield. I yield. Whatever you want, I yield." The worst part is, elder brothers see nothing wrong with their control. They see nothing wrong with their control. They want to try to control God, and they see nothing wrong with it. And they are fierce at condemning others. Oh, men and women, especially those of you in the millennial generation, if you're watching this, men and women, I want to challenge you. I believe many people have rejected the church because of older brothers. Many people have rejected the church because of older brothers. I was working with a young man who had given up on the church. And as I sat down with him and I helped him to see the differences between the younger prodigal son and the older prodigal son, and how older prodigal sons can be believers in the church, but very disobedient, I challenged him. I said, "Young man, I think you've given up on the church because you saw a church full of older prodigal sons and you've never seen someone who delights in their relationship with God." And he said, "I think you're right." I think you're right. Oh, if you've given up on the church, give Jesus another chance. Don't look at the older prodigal sons. Look at Jesus and His relationship that He wants with you. And men and women, I want to encourage you, don't be an older brother. Don't be an older brother. It is possible to be active in the church and still be a cat. Still be separated from God's love. Still trying to be in control. It is possible. I see it all the time. I see it all the time. Do not trust in your good deeds. Don't have a business relationship with God. You will be lost in your Father's house. I don't want that for you. You don't want that for you. And your Heavenly Father doesn't want that for you. But most Christians have missed it because they haven't realized that there's a cancer in the church. It's eating away at them. It's 1 degree off. It's cat theology. It's call it whatever you want. They're staying immature. And they've missed God's heart for them. Well, I hope this lecture has encouraged you. Well, in our next time together, we're going to be looking at how cat theology stunts your spiritual growth. Welcome to Maturing the Bride.